Mark. It comes right in the midst of a series of warnings that Jesus gives his disciples about his upcoming crucifixion and the resulting resurrection. Warnings that they not only fail to heed, but also fail to truly understand. Hear this reading. Then Jesus and the disciples came to Capernaum. And when Jesus was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. Jesus sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between pry open our hearts, our eyes, and our ears. Amen. She was born on April 1st, 1961, April Fool's Day. Her mother was a shorthand typist, and her father worked deep in the mines. They lived a commonplace sort of life. She was the youngest of 9 children, and her mother was already 45 when she entered the world. She had a learning disability and suffered from what would later be identified as Asperger's syndrome. She was often bullied by her classmates, tormented by them on the playground, called names like Simple Susie. Despite her difficulties in school, she longed to be a singer. And so, as an adult, she took lessons and sang in the church choir. And while she worked for a short time as a cook's apprentice, most of her adult life was spent caring for her aging and ill mother. She never married and was somewhat overweight. Her hair was a frizzy, unkempt mess. Her eyebrows were never groomed. They were dark and thick. Her clothes were far from stylish, and her appearance would charitably be called frumpy. But her mother kept encouraging her to sing, even suggested she enter a talent competition or two. And in 2009, she landed an audition for one of the United Kingdom's most popular television programs. As she stepped on the stage, one could see the looks of pity on the judges' faces. The audience seemed to titter in disbelief. How had this older woman in a old-fashioned woolen jacket and skirt, how could she have made it so far? But then Then she opened her mouth and sang, quite appropriately, "I dreamed a dream" from Les Miserables. And suddenly, hearts and minds were opened. She could sing. She could really sing. The applause was overwhelming, and as the competition drew on over the weeks ahead, Susan Boyle rose to the top of the ranks, finishing second that season on Great Britain's Got Talent. Her debut album, released later that same year, was the biggest seller of 2009 throughout the United Kingdom, and worldwide sold over 2 million copies. Susan Boyle, seemingly just another frumpy seamstress, but at heart, she was a singer. The central figure in our lesson from 1 Samuel could most likely relate. He, too, was the youngest of 9 siblings, and no one thought he'd amount to very much. But he was also a musician. He played the harp and created some of the most beautiful songs ever written. Saul, the first king of Israel, had fallen out of favor with God. He had willfully disobeyed the Holy One. And so the search was on for a new king, even while Saul still sat on the throne. It was a secret search, a covert version of Israel's Got Talent. The leading prophet of the day, a man named Samuel, is instructed by God to go to Bethlehem, where he will find the one to be anointed as the new king. He's even given a street address, so to speak, and a family name. It will be one of the sons of Jesse, God tells him. So Samuel heads out, and when he reaches Bethlehem, he is greeted by the elders of the village. He tells them he's come there to offer a sacrifice and to worship God. He invites them to join him in the ritual. And he says, "Why don't you invite that fellow named Jesse to come? And have him bring his boys with him as well. I hear it's a lovely family and that he's a really good man." So they do. And when they all arrive on the scene, Samuel looks Jesse's sons over as they stand lined up in descending order of height and age. The first, the eldest, is Eliab. He's a strapping young man, muscled and good-looking, easy on the eyes. He is appropriately deferential to his elders, and he appears to have a quick mind. But God tells Samuel, keep looking. Eliab's not the one. Don't judge by appearances, Samuel. Don't be fooled by his height or his good looks, says God. Don't put much stock in outward appearances. Rather, look into a man's heart. And so Samuel moves on. Abinadab? No, says God, not Abinadab. Shammah? No, not that one either. On down the line to the very end. But none of them are chosen by God to be king. Samuel, no doubt a bit frustrated, turns to Jesse. "I know you've brought out a whole passel of sons here, Jesse, but are there any more? Is someone missing?" "Well, yes," says Jesse as he shrugs. "There's the youngest, David. He's not very big. He's the runt of the litter, and he doesn't seem to be amounting to much, on account of his size and everything. He spends his days playing his harp and singing to the sheep. Send one of the boys to get him, says Samuel. And Jesse does. And when David shows up, Samuel immediately realizes he is the one God has chosen. He anoints him and proclaims he will be king. And in time, he is recognized as king by the whole nation. Such a fine king that he is forever after known as Israel's greatest king. David, the tiny shepherd boy. David, who became a king, but at heart, he was a singer. The journalists who commented on Susan Boyle's first appearance on Great Britain's Got Talent often noted that one shouldn't judge a book by its cover. And so they might have commented had they been around in David's day. It, of course, is a fundamental truism when it comes to God. Others may look on outward appearances, but God looks on the heart. God sees people, sees us for who we really are. God doesn't label people as simple Susies or shepherd boys wasting their time in the fields. No, God sees the great potential that lies within. In Panther Creek, Tennessee, a few years back, a young woman named Karen wanted to prepare her older child for the birth of a new sibling. So once she found out they were expecting a girl, Karen had her firstborn, 3-year-old Michael, snuggle up to her belly every day and sing to his unborn sister. A few months passed, and at last the long-anticipated day arrived. Karen went into labor. But there were complications. The little girl is born with serious problems. And she's rushed to the closest neonatal intensive care unit in Knoxville, where perhaps they can help the newborn. But things only get worse. The little girl's condition deteriorates. The finest doctors, the best nurses, the most expensive equipment, none of it seems to make a difference. The pediatrician in charge tells Karen and her husband to prepare for the worst. Torn with sadness, they leave the hospital and they go out and purchase a tiny burial plot. They make arrangements for a funeral. But through it all, 3-year-old Michael keeps pestering them. He wants to meet his new sister. He wants to sing to her. Finally, Karen relents. The baby could die at any moment. And if Michael is to see her, it has to be now. But there's a hitch. The hospital doesn't permit sibling visits. No children allowed, especially not in the neonatal unit. And the head nurse is not one to be fooled with. That boy does not belong here, she says. Get him out now. Karen is unwavering. He's not going until he sees his sister. And so she takes her little son by the hand and walks him to where the infant lies on the very edge of death. At first, Michael just stares. But then, very softly, he begins to sing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Seemingly out of nowhere, the baby's erratic pulse begins to steady itself. Sing some more, Michael. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Her breathing becomes easier, more regular. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. The baby's tiny body, which has been clenched, relaxes. Even the head nurse is amazed. And a few weeks later, Michael stands proudly with his parents as his baby sister, his sunshine, is baptized at the Panther Creek Church. Make of the story what you will, but it's a true one. It really happened. And if nothing else, it reminds us that while others may look at outward appearances, like that head nurse, God says, I look at the heart. I look at the heart. And that, my friends, is something to sing about.